So mixing a pool leash, you want to make sure that your water is nice and cold so you can get your 16 to 18 hours of fermentation. I always add my water first. Then I want to make sure that my yeast is spot on. So I use a little microgram scale, making sure that my yeast is to 1/10 of a gram. So just a little bit too much. Spot on. Add my yeast. Then scale the flour. And I always recommend mix this in a bowl, not in the storage container, because it's so much easier. Trying to incorporate all your ingredients to get a homogeneous consistency so you don't get any lumps, dry or wet spots in this process. So use a bowl scraper and combine the ingredients to get a nice, smooth consistency. So now you can start to see that we've got a nice, smooth consistency. You always want to work it like a soft batter. And then we can pour it into the container. And what's nice about putting it into a container like this, we can start to see where the pool leash starts at this point. And tomorrow, depending on when we get to this project, we can see whether we have matured the pool leash, hopefully not over matured it by seeing a high watermark. And leaving it in a clear container really gives you a nice visual effect. Cover it with a lid and keep it in an environment of about 70 to 75 degrees. So we're working on the ciabatta here, and I'm going to use a double hydration technique in mixing. I'm going to add my water to my pool leash. This will release it from the container a whole lot easier. And we're going to hold back approximately 15% of my liquid. Which I'm going to add at a later point. Then I add this into my bowl and the dry ingredients on top. So after it's finished mixing on first speed, we increase the mixing speed to a number 2, so we develop some strength, and we let that mix for approximately 30 seconds to a minute. And then we slowly add in our remaining water. So I've completely maxed out the size of this bowl. We're mixing approximately 6 kilos of dough here once all this water is in here, which you can only do if you have such a highly hydrated dough. And as you can see, it's starting to travel up the hook a little bit, so I've turned the speed down to a number 1 setting so that it doesn't travel up that hook, and continuously add my water. It should be in about 3 to 4 stages. So the nice thing is, with this double hydration technique, I've got a pretty well-developed gluten membrane, which is going to take a little bit more time on mixing, but it's going to give me less stretch and folds. So what we're going to do is we're just going to organize this real quick, make sure it's nicely placed in our bin, and we're going to take a temperature reading of it, identifying that it hopefully is between 75 and 78 degrees, and we're going to allow it to go through the bulk fermentation stage. Looks good. Cover it with a lid. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it a stretch and fold. This is our ciabatta project. I want to show the importance of wetting your hands. So I got one hand dry, one hand wet. When I touch the surface, this is what happens. So you want to make sure to keep your hands nice and wet during this process. Otherwise you do more damage to the gluten-forming proteins. Grab the dough from the back, fold forward, and do this in every direction. Again, the principle is to build strength, balance out temperature, and degas the dough so that new CO2 can form. Then we cover the dough and let it rest for another 45 minutes. So this is our third and final stretch and fold, and you can start to see how well developed this dough actually is. So you really are able to retain those gases that are being released by yeast fermenting the sugars. So I'm going to give it that one last stretch and fold, give it another 30 minutes, and then we're going to divide this project. Now we're ready to divide our ciabatta. We're going to make sure that it doesn't stick to the surface. We're going to make sure that there's enough flour on top of our dough. We're going to also cover our work surface and put plenty of flour down. And then what you want to do is, as you take it out of the container, you've got to make sure it's released from the sides, and then flip it right over and let it naturally fall in place. Next thing we want to do is we want to cover the surface with a little bit of flour just so we can manipulate it. Make sure it doesn't stick to our table. And what I'm going to do now is give it one fold on itself. So I'm going to pick this up and fold it over here. Now that you've completed the fold, you got to make sure that you put enough flour on here that it really doesn't stick. Put enough on the table, to the back side of it, and then just with the bench scraper, push that flour underneath. And then what you're going to do is you're going to degas this surface. And you can be fairly aggressive in this. Next thing I'm going to do is trim the back edge, the front edge, and every edge around the outside perimeter so that I have a little bit of scrap dough. Now that we've trimmed all of our edges off, I'm going to just use this tool as a little bit of a guide to start the dividing process. I'm going to divide this dough in half and in half this way. That gives me 4 pieces. I want to make sure that I get at least 8, if not 12 pieces out of here. So depending on the size ciabatta, we can divide it like so, making large pieces. Or we can take them and cut narrower pieces and work it this way. Because usually I don't weigh these. half. And then I'm going to take this little piece, place it on top, pick it up, and flip it over. Again, trim, lay it on top, and flip it over. Put a nice pleat in here, and repeat this process. One thing I would recommend every time you've made a cut, always throw a little flour down here, release it, and then make your incisions. So once the ciabatta is ready to be loaded into the oven, you want to make sure that your surface doesn't bond with the dough. And I'd recommend cover your surface of your ciabatta one more time with flour so it sure doesn't stick. Gently pick it up and flip it over onto your loading peel. And then it's ready for the oven. Again, I would recommend baking this at about 450, 480 degrees for a total of about 30 to 40 minutes. So now that we finished our ciabatta project, the telltale sign is, what does the crumb look like? And I think because we've used a spiral mixer, I think we're going to be in for a real pleasant surprise. Hopefully we're going to get a nice open crumb structure. So this to me is an ideal looking loaf of bread where you have this beautiful gelatinization on your crumb structure. It is airy, light, and the aroma is sweet and buttery.